Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our 32nd installment. That's right, our 32nd installment of our virtual CavanKerry Press reading series. I am your host and Marketing Communications Director, Dimitri Reyes. For those that need a visual description, I am a beautifully brown Puerto Rican male with a bob haircut and a long brown beard, which is probably coming in black. I have a red t-shirt on that says CavanKerry Press on it, and I have brown glasses. And I'm so excited for this reading today, this launch of Seraphim, which A to Z, this book is phenomenal. And actually, that makes me think about a beautiful coupon code for this evening. If you do the coupon code with the book order A to Z, you will get this book for 20% off this evening. And Tamara, our lovely social media coordinator, will be putting that in the chat. So if you don't have a copy yet, or you want to buy a copy for someone else, if you put A to Z as a coupon code on the website, you'll get that for 20% off. Super, super exclusive. It is my honor this evening to celebrate the book launch of Seraphim. And we also have a special guest with us, Dr. Taylor Byas, which has this awesome book called I Done Clicked My Heels 3 Times, to read a little bit for us today. There's so much overlap between these two books about some Black women from Chi-Town, and it's just an amazing culmination of what work is, life, what work is expressed, and what work is in that womanhood and that sisterhood of being from Chicago. So before we start that, because Taylor is actually going to take over for this evening, y'all. They're both going to have a wonderful conversation. She's relieving me of my duties tonight, and I greatly appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to our social media coordinator first to give us our land acknowledgement.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tamara Akaisi Coleman. I'm the social media coordinator for CavanKerry Press. Visual description for all the folks. I'm a pale Middle Eastern woman with very curly hair, and that's just my identifier. And I'm wearing a Palestine sweatshirt. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the latest in CavanKerry series of virtual readings celebrating our new and forthcoming releases. Before the reading begins, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the land we occupy in Bergen County, New Jersey belongs to the Munsee Lenape people. We honor their history. We cannot function in our work as arts activists, nor a safe space for all writers without understanding the struggle for Indigenous rights. We're going to add to the chat a map of native lands for you to identify which land you occupy, and also link to a few resources for you to learn more and or offer your support. We would also like to wish our Muslim community Ramadan Mubarak. The holy month ends on Tuesday, and an Eid Mubarak for Eid al-Fitr, which ends the month of fasting. We hope you have the opportunity to celebrate with friends and family, and hope we can share in this beautiful time with you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Dimitri.
Thank you so much, Tamara. I appreciate you. So before we start our evening, I'm also going to mention throughout the evening, if you have anything, if you want to say anything that sounds beautiful, that sounds fire, that sounds just delectable, just put it in the chat. I'm going to send this chat to both of our authors after this reading so they can feel the love that you were feeling during the reading. Also, if you have any questions, there is going to be a conversation between the both of them, but you can also ask your own questions and I'll be sure to moderate them in a response to them near the end of the reading. So without further ado, before I pitch it over to these two lovely ladies, I'm going to read their bios so we know what we're working with. So Dr. Taylor Byas, PhD, she, her, is a Black Chicago native, currently living in Cincinnati, Ohio, where she is a features editor for The Rumpus and a poetry acquisitions editor for Variant Literature, and an editorial advisor for Jackleg Press. She is the first place winner of the 2020 Poetry Superhighway Contest, the 2020 Frontier Poetry Award for New Poets Contest, and the 2021 Adrian Rich Poetry Prize. She is the author of the chapbook Bloodworm from Variant Literature, a second chapbook from Shudder from Madhouse Press, and her first debut length, I Done Clicked My Heel 3 times from Soft Skull Press, which won the 2023 Maya Angelou Book Award and the 2023 Chicago Review of Books Award in poetry. She got books on books on books, awards on awards on awards. She's a co-editor of the Southern Poetry Anthology, Volume 5, Alabama, from Texas Review Press, and of Poemhood, Our Black Revival, a young adult anthology on Black folklore from HarperCollins. And now the princesa, the queen of the evening, Angelique Zobitz. She, her, hers, is the author of the chapbooks Burn Down Your House from Milk and Cake Press and Love Letters to the Revolution from American Poetry Journal. Her work has been a 2022 Jake Adam York finalist, 2022 Philip Levine Prize semifinalist, 2022 St. Lawrence finalist, 2022 Tupelo Prize finalist, and 2021 Georgia Poetry Prize finalist. Basically, if you took all the awards from these two people and stacked them up, they would make a phone book while you're driving. Nominated multiple times for Best of the Net, Best New Poets, and a Pushcart Prize, her poems have appeared in The Journal, Sugar House Review, Obsidian, Literature and Arts for the African Diaspora, and many others. She can be found at www.angeliquezobitz.com and on Twitter and Instagram at Angelique Zobitz. Now I will turn it over to Dr. Taylor Byas.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. Thank you so much for putting this all together, for inviting me to celebrate Angelique this evening, and to CavanKerry Press, of course, for making all of this possible. For those who need a visual description, I am a Black woman wearing straightened brown hair. I'm wearing a gray-blue Captain America t-shirt and a gold necklace. So my debut full length, I didn't click my heels 3 times. Thinks a lot about Chicago, home, family, and sort of how all of those things come together. You know, there are conversations about religion as well. And we were talking about this earlier, but I think it's just really kind of incredible how many similarities there are between our collections. So I'm really, really excited to get to pick your brain about some of those. But before we get into that, I'm just going to sort of open with 2 poems. And I'm going to start with the very first poem, which is the first sonnet, also in the Southside sonnet sequence. So this is Southside 1. This is what teaches me love. Your streets, their wailing for their dead. The way a siren becomes a mother too. How my parents hold me like some frail thing to their chests at night. How quick they are to cover my ears when the block gets hot. The handshake half hug sacred enough to make a man feel whole again. The shape-shifting. How what looks like a thug in darkness softens into a boy in the gold glow of a bedside lamp. How we are all somebody's grandbaby. Harold's chicken steeped in so much hot sauce, the nose runs, and the small piece of bread too wet to hold, drowning beneath the fries, each of our brownstones side by side. So there's nowhere to run, nowhere for us to cry. And then the second poem that I'm going to read, I'm going to read a poem which I don't typically read, but I want to read because it's going to launch us into conversation perfectly. And so this is my poem called Mother. And it's a definition poem, and it sort of begins with the different definitions, and then it sort of explores those different definitions. So mother, 1, a female parent. 2, maternal tenderness or affection. 3, short for motherfucker, sometimes vulgar. 1, I have not yet been split by motherhood, have not yet felt my body become sick with itself, relinquished of its own parts. The lips that have latched on to me, I needed in a different way. Yet I hurt the way a mother hurts, stretch marks like tendons, like ribbons piecing me together, heavy breasts like water balloons that never burst on contact, gifts I refuse to open. 2, my body knows something I don't, like how to take up space, how to fill a hole. I slip into the hands that call for me at dusk, when the hour knows no difference from mother or sister or daughter. Hips can bear the sins of others too. Perhaps this is what tips the scale. Those morsels of sorry and hold me I collect from bathroom floors and bedsides. 3, The first time motherfucker felt like anything, it was my father calling my mother the name, thrown over his shoulder like salt after he spilled it in restaurants. An exit wound. My mother bore it painfully at first, then quietly, sort of like giving birth. Once you tear all the way through, everything feels like nothing, and nothing hurts. So I wanted to read and end there because we can start with the title, but before we start with the title, I wanna back up and first talk about mothers. So this book begins with the dedication, right, to the Seraphim, but most especially my mother, dedicated to your own mother. And then we have this really gorgeous definition on the next page of Seraphim, which I would like to read for everyone. The name Seraphim clearly indicates their ceaseless and eternal revolution about divine principles, their heat and keenness, their exuberance, the exuberance of their intense, perpetual, tireless activity, and their elevative and energetic assimilation of those below, kindling them and firing them to their own heat, and wholly purifying them by a burning and all-consuming flame, and by the unhidden, unquenchable, changeless, radiant, and enlightening power, dispelling and destroying the shadows of darkness. One could say that that definition can also apply to Black mothers. And there's so many ways that I think this book thinks about mothering. We have a speaker in this book that considers sort of what her mother has taught her earlier on in the book. And then later we have a poem in which the constant lesson, right, in which the speaker sort of considers her own daughter training to be a ballerina and everything that the world might teach the child about her body and beauty. So I wanted to open by asking, how do you see mothering, the act of mothering, sort of central to Black women's joy and or spirituality?
Oof. Starting with the hard questions. So,
Right.
before I jump into answering that question, I want to say hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with me as we launch Seraphim. I'm obviously Angelique Zobitz, the author. And I want to say especially thank you to Dr. Taylor Byas, who I have long admired. I made a joke earlier, and often that I've stalked her because I think she's just such an incredible individual. As far as my description, I am an early 40s, brown-skinned, femme Black woman with a short, sandy blonde, curly afro, wearing gold door knocker earrings and a Black crew neck shirt. Before I jump in and answer that question, I also would like to acknowledge that we're gathering during an act of genocide taking place in Gaza. I stand in solidarity with the victims of genocide in Sudan and Congo, and with the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands I live, including the Illinois, the Sauk, Peoria, Muskogee, Potawatomi, Kickapoo, and Winnebago. I stand firmly against anti-Blackness and recognize that police violence and all white supremacist violence must be named and opposed. These forms of violence, as well as the transphobic violence being legislated across the country, endanger the lives of trans, queer, gender nonconforming, and non-binary folks. Therefore, before we begin and I answer this question, I wish to underscore that none of us are free until all of us are free, and that all anti-racist, liberationist, and decolonial struggles are intertwined. So, love to all of you. The concept of mothering being central to Black womanhood, it's obviously infused throughout this book. I learned what it meant to be a Black woman through the influences that were in my life. And in some instances, motherhood did not mean necessarily the mother that I had, though it did include that, but also the community of women who supported me and uplifted both myself, my mother, my grandmother, the folks who held me dear. And so I always thought of mothering as a verb as well as a noun. And so it's the position I take as I go out into the world, where I see others who are in transition and flux, where I see struggle and oppression. I think of myself as this mother who has a transformative ability to act on the world. And so that's why that definition of the Seraphim is so apt to me. I've seen individuals in various socioeconomic situations still have this absolute um, compelling power to enact change in their communities, with others, and just in the world in general. I think there's just something extraordinarily powerful about Black women. Obviously, I'm biased, but when we raise our voices, we make change. And this concept really began to solidify for me during kind of the election years and 2016, and how Black women just showed up, because we recognized that it wasn't just for ourselves, that um, we did this and that we made change. And so certainly you'll feel that resonance and power throughout the book, and you'll see the kind of the veneration, to be honest, of all of these different women across multiple strata, and sometimes giving folks flowers who you would not necessarily, you know, immediately think of as deserving of the flowers. But I know that those folks have made an impact on me, and they make an impact on the world as well.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned sort of Black women showing up, during the election, for example, and in veneration, because I think there is something about the teaching that comes from, I think, Black women, Black mothers, Black elders, that is like often fundamentally like antithetical to the teachings of the world, right? Society, and church, which religion is also a big thing in this book. And so, of course, we have the title Seraphim, hints at one of the book's major themes, religion. But I want to go a step further and offer that there is a sort of permeable membrane between the spiritual and the corporeal of the book, where heavenly things are sort of brought down to earth, and then earthly things are kind of made sacred. Two poems in particular that I would love to hear, and I think others would love to hear, that come to mind when thinking about this. The opening poem, of course, one of my favorites, Sister Seraphim, Inextinguishable Light, and God the Father. So I would love to hear those. And then I would love to hear you talk about that constant exchange between the spiritual and the corporeal that's happening in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with reading Sister Seraphim, Inextinguishable Light. They dancing and singing tonight. Black Barbies backlit by gas station fluorescence, stunning, singing, holy, holy, holy. Their loud praises rattling my window, syncopated steps, wings out, rhythm on, radiant, with a backbeat unbroken, backs unbroken, unfettered and unbothered in 8 and 16 time. This very night, there before me is an angel, and I saw her drop it low, all while cars pull in and out, top off or fill up at the pumps. I can relate to being half empty and thirsting to be full. She, her, they blazing. This could be worship, loud and exuberant as every light-leached club where I once got hot and sweaty to reggae, rubbed underneath somebody as vigorously as kindling before catching fire. It could be easy to forget how good adoration feels. I can't forget what good feels like. Paradise. They so flame and I see it. It could be heaven. This lot of half-leveled, bumpy concrete, glittering full, jeweled with bottle shards and wrapping paper confetti. They could burn it all down, but glory. They invite us to join the chorus. And now, God the Father. So, God the Father is as Taylor mentioned, a little bit of an interesting one. So, this is very much centered on religion, and making the regular holy, the holy regular. But God the Father, there's we think about, the biblical story about how we are made in God's image. And it caused a lot of thinking for me about for what purpose were we needed to be made in this person's image. And I have a little bit of a complicated relationship with my father. I think we've come to this great place as we've gotten older, as I've become a parent and kind of recognized the hard decisions that folks have made. But this one especially was written at a time where I was grappling with those things. So, God the Father. Poor little Catholic girl, you've given up on calling for your father. What is God but an absentee father? Because father is the name for daddy when his presence is felt but he's never seen. That makes father a synonym for faith. Both are why you stopped calling on God, having learned he only made you to sing his praises. So when I talk about the presence of angels and God, and I really do believe that there is as Taylor mentioned, like there is this permeable nature that exists between those things. I thought it was important that we see that in each of these exchanges that there is fallibility that exists with God, and that there is holiness that exists within the average, the mundane, I had just moved back to Chicago. I was living across the street from a gas station, and one of the Black joy just exists everywhere. And I think those are gifts that are given to us by the spirit world, because we just light up everything. And so I was living across from this gas station, and there were these girls who pulled up to the gas station at 2:00 in the morning. And it was like watching something holy and celestial, how individuals somehow could turn a parking lot, a gas station, into a place of communion and joy and vibrancy and brilliance. And I wanted to be upset that it was 2:00 in the morning and I could hear these folks outside my window, but I found myself being caught up in this exuberance and this spirit. Usually I would yell out the window and tell them to shut up, but this was just a type of joy that you could not interfere with. And to recognize that and see that oftentimes Black women are being asked to make themselves smaller, less vibrant, less loud, less joyous. And here were these women just being and lighting up this world, this corner. And it resonated with me so deeply that why can't I venerate that? Why can't I elevate that to show the importance of that joy? And so that's where that poem came from. And God the Father on the flip side was making our gods more human.
Yeah. Word to Amy in the chat. I'm so glad you are venerating this joy. But I also love this description of that veneration, of looking at these women in the parking lot, as I think there's something about that sort of permeable nature, blurring the line between the two, that kind of like makes everything then sacred, right? And one of the things that is also very present in this book is the erotic and the sensual, which also exist right alongside the religious in this book. One of the crazy similarities that we have between our book, I have a kinky religious poem, you have a kinky religious poem. And so you already know what I'm probably gonna ask, but so we have kink therapy, or an alternate history of the world, which is one of two poems in this book that also appears sideways, the other one being Till It Moves Like a Slow Song Sounds. And these are poems that to me very noticeably juxtapose intimate touch and religion. And so I would love to hear kink therapy. And then I also want to hear about, like, first, was there a sort of like conscious choice about placing those sideways? Because there's a way that it makes me kind of slow down, I think, as I move through this book, which I think is a really interesting choice for those poems. And then, of course, I would love to hear about your relationship with the erotic and the religion, and how those two are sort of like going hand in hand when thinking about these poems.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll jump in to kink therapy, and then I'll get to Till It Moves Like a Slow Song Sounds. And I'll talk in between about the two. So kink therapy, or an alternate history of the world. For need of bread, there were days where I slid a noose around the necks of white men, put my boots in their backs, and watched the brown skin of my knuckles pull taut while I composed my grocery list, considered the aubergine paint of my nails, calculated the tipping point between asphyxiation and role play. I rode their backs, the miserable beasts, made these men into collared horses who carried my burdens, dug my heels into their lathered flesh, shamed them into the ground. Are you so weak that you can't carry the burden of one Black woman? Once I chained a man ankle to wrist over the spanking bench, and with a strategic application of medical grade lubricant forced him to take what I could give. My favorite client had impeccable manners, a sweet thank you for every bruise, my bare foot firmly rubbed across the freckled cream skin of his cheek flushed him red as spring roses. He was allowed to come on Saturdays and brought me tins of coffee, Harar, Katura, Kona, Pacamora, Orusha, Sumatra, Mayaguz, Salawa, Toraja, Kalosa, Karamor, Timor, Bonafoyer, Yaragorshe, Uganda. He only asked for what I formerly considered unspeakable acts. He begged me to beat his guilt away, to be tethered to a table, the St. Andrew's cross, or the ceiling. I told him to repeat after me, I ain't shit and I mean nothing. Compelled him to make 8 sounds while he masturbated at whip point. Tears flecked his flushed cheeks. He sought absolution and I spoke reparations. I told him to let it go, and he came, and I came to the conclusion the opposite of a mirror still doesn't have a name. So, despite what most folks would actually think, this is not a persona poem. After I graduated college, I actually did work at a dungeon. It's one of my side jobs. And what I noticed as a Black woman in that field is that lots of white men came to me for exactly this scenario. There was this white guilt that they carried, and rather than seeking therapy or working through the knot of our socialization, it was easier to partake of this transactional power exchange where they felt there was an opportunity to put themselves in the position of an oppressed individual. Now, you and I both know that this is a reality that does not exist for them, and it is only transactional and it is only make-believe. But it also gave me an opportunity and a feeling of power in a time in my life where being a young 20-something year old woman who was going out into the greater world and grappling with what it meant to be a Black woman in a society that does not always value you. And so it gave me an opportunity to fulfill my own, I guess, fantasies of power. I wrote this poem to go sideways because it's not, I wanted it to feel different because this is a different experience, and it's not one that a typical layout, would give the space to explore. a regular page would change things. And so rather than changing this scenario, often, kind of like the scenario I was in real life, I changed the page in order to represent the feeling. And so, and it did give it the space that it needed to breathe. Now, Till It Moves Like a Slow Song Sounds, which is after Patricia Smith, who is also a Chicago poet. She's West Side. We love her. We love her. I mean, both Taylor and I have work that we have like done in homage and things, but Till It Moves Like a Slow Song Sounds came from her just incredible opus poem, Until the Burning Starts. And it centers on this deeply complicated relationship that she had with her parents, this very loving, nurturing one with her father, and the juxtaposition that it put her and her mother into, because, parental and children dynamics can get pretty interesting, as both Taylor and I explore in our books as well. So this is why you got to check all three out. But Till It Moves Like a Slow Song Sound. So it's a golden shovel after Patricia Smith. Friday. My great auntie used to hold me till police sirens crept down the street. We'd feel it go silent, quiet, thrumming in alleyways. Her rough hand moves up and down and across my back from nape to blade, like cat foot smooth steppers at the lounge, clasping hands in a prayer of what we find holy. Al Green crooning slow, molasses rhythms, soul communion, skin to skin, carrying a song as she crafted love out of terror sounds. Saturday. For every stovetop press and curl, Joyce held my head still. Friday night liquor fumes wafting near my nose. Sometimes she'd hit my ear. I'd flinch at the hot comb sizzle. How fast my straight back moves in that vinyl covered seat. She'd tap my shoulder with her hand, still silent, like we both learned to not say I'm sorry when others hurt us in a roundabout way, watching her ex-husband walk late and slow through the door, to no hurry to pick up the boys she raised, while a song testifying of what can and cannot be changed sounds. Sunday. After Mass, I'd lean into the padded kneeler, hand clasped till I'd run out of adolescent prayers of intercession, candlelit incense and taper flames under the rafters move, the Holy Spirit glow over my slick blue magic sheen scalp, like every Black saint framed in stained glass above gave benediction, a largismo duet, communion of past and present, as easy as slow sanctification, soft affection back for every prayer in their names, song as sweet as altar wine, and praise and glory without making sounds. And so, as Taylor mentioned, both of these poems, which are turned sideways, very much center on touch, and the different ways that touch can be holy. And in kink therapy, something about that type of touch felt like absolution. It felt like being absolved of sin. And Till It Moves Like a Slow Song Sounds, me as this youth throughout this weekend is existing as part of this chaotic world. And what grounded me was the touch, whether it was a great auntie, her name was Fairlene, or the upstairs neighbor Joyce who pressed my hair, or even at Mass, the communion of those who sat near me, or even the touch of the saints in my spirit, was a feeling of soft joy. It felt like a hug. It did not take away from what the world I was experiencing in the world, but it gave me this feeling of safety and comfort. And so, again, the reason this in itself was turned sideways is it needed its own shape to breathe. I did not, these intentionally had longer lines, almost essayistic, kind of Whitman-esque, because it needed that space to explore the joy and the love and the feeling of what grounds us through touch.
Yeah, I love the comment you made after King Therapy about sort of like, instead of changing the, the context, the space of the poem, I just changed the page, right, for the poem to fit. And interestingly enough, too, you're talking about touch being the thing that sort of like grounds in the world of chaos, which I'm sure is something that rings true for all of us, maybe right now in particular. And I think those poems also appearing sideways also feel kind of like these anchors that sort of like present themselves differently. So it's really interesting to think about those choices that we make and how they also can sort of, stop our reader, or pause our reader as we move through. And thinking about the reader moving through, sections and sort of organization, something that I poured over a lot and thought about a lot in my book. I didn't click my heels has 7 sections. So sorry, y'all, but it was intentional. And, we thought a lot about, well, if we're going to have this many sections, we have to be really kind of intentional about how we're titling them. And we have to be really intentional about how we're leading a reader through. So Seraphim has 4 sections titled You Are Your Mother's Child, We Sang the Stars, Imperfect Yet Unbroken, and Lush and Rain, Bounty and Lean. And me personally, I found myself experiencing a sort of like healing trajectory as I moved through the collection. But I'm curious about what you imagined the trajectory to be as you sort of put the book together and thought, very intentionally about how you ordered these poems in the sections. So tell me about those sections, their titles and their functions, and how you imagine this arrangement will kind of lead your reader through the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So you are spot on. It was meant to be a journey. And it's funny because, again, that's one of the similarities in our own books. Your journey from Chicago to where you are today, and how you, as this Dorothy-esque figure, you encounter all these the adventures, we'll say, and how your work has changed and developed, and the space that you occupy today versus where you were when you started. And so it really just, when I got your book, I was like, oh my goodness, there you go, there's another similarity there. But the 4 sections definitely represented not necessarily linearly, but a journey in terms of how I saw myself and other Black women. It was important for me, like when you start from the beginning, when I talk about my mother, even, because, we are, before anything, we are our mother's children. And whatever decisions we make, whether we take on their same choices or we choose to make different ones, you are your mother's child. And so I felt like that gave me an opportunity to establish that I am part of a legacy, and that in it, her perseverance is a mantle that I inherit, and that I could potentially pass on. And then as we start to progress through this journey, I get to the next one, which is We Sang the Stars. And then that is taken from one of the poems, Black Marie Antoinette. And it's about all of these forces that exist in juxtaposition to our Blackness and our womanness that, you know, the state, you know, with violence against our bodies, against our children, against our partners, and just knowing that we could exist in this small pocket, the home that we create, the space that we create for those we love, sings the stars. We still find these pockets of joy. And then moving to imperfect yet unbroken, realizing you don't have to be perfect to be loved. And that's a lot of what's in that space. That's where God the Father comes from. That's where confession comes from. I could be made in someone's image, and it could, but I don't need to be perfect to be loved, to be worthy. And that's something that I think we all grapple with as we get older, right? Like, we have these perceptions of ourselves as individuals, even as writers, right? Like, if I could just do this way, if I could be like this writer, if I could be like Taylor, you know, all of those things, then I will be loved. But no, it's okay for me to be me and for me to be imperfect. And then it kind of comes full circle. It's, you know, lush and rain, bounty and lean, which is a space that I don't think I think as a child, I did not recognize that there was lush and rain, that in order for there to be lush, that there had to be rain, that there could be bounty and lean, that I might not have all of the money. I might not be in exactly the space. I might not have even known those things because my parental figures, my mother figures shielded me from so much. But there was so much bounty that existed within that. And now that I am a parent, I get to give that to my daughter, that I get to create this joy. Yeah, the Jelly Bean loves my poetry too. She, of course, takes all of this time to talk about it. But it gave me an opportunity to say, this is a legacy that I now to continue. And I can now share with my own daughter, which is where the constant lesson comes from. That's where, you know, some of the things like blessed, we ain't never been saints, not been saints. A lot of the interpersonal relationships that go into creating beauty and joy within spaces of lean.
Yeah, there's this really beautiful cycle that I think kind of happens in the book, this acknowledgement of the legacy, and then sort of at the end recognizing that it will also be time for you to then pass that on as well. And in the vein of continuing to think about how things are connected, you have a wonderful poem series running through the book, what I like to call the after listening poems, that are these sort of like really wonderful, intimate bursts of energies, poems in which I feel like I know the speaker best. Music is obviously woven into the fabric of both the Black poetic tradition and Black spiritual practices as well. And the after listening poems usher in these contemporary songs, these more contemporary songs for us to consider. My favorite one out of that series is undeniably after listening to Megan Thee Stallion's Thought Shit, because of its energy and for the way it talks back and sort of like upends our expectations. So can you read Megan Thee Stallion's That Shit poem for us, and then talk about your relationship with music and praise in this book? You mentioned earlier sort of giving flowers to those who we would not expect. And so I would love to hear more about that in this poem series.
Absolutely. So, as you so aptly called out, you know, music is part of the Black spiritual tradition. And just the Black experience in general. I have so many memories of Saturday morning, you know, someone turning on music in the house, and then that's how we knew it was time to clean. And we heard everything. You know, like if you didn't have some Stevie Wonder or some Jackson 5 or some BB King on, and or even some gospel, even though we were Catholic, we still got down with all the gospel, the country, everything, right? And so, and the music didn't turn off until you were done sweeping, mopping, cleaning, etc. And so it just, what I learned to love about myself and about my community was woven into music. You know, all of the things that we discussed, whether it was love, whether it was sad, whether it was being broke, you know, like, hey, it was part of the music. And so and it was the rhythm, it was the backbone of like our day. You know, you get in the car and you just immediately turned on the radio, or got the 8-track. There was a point where there were still 8 tracks in the car I like rode in. It was crazy. And so, and there was no differentiation between like what was venerable. Like, I heard some hot sexual, you know, blues music and all kinds of other things. And so I learned that that was the fullness of our experience. And so these 4 ephrastics really bring, were intended to highlight and to, again, show that there is so much beauty in these different facets of our lives. And so after listening to Megan Thee Stallion's Thought Shit, like, come on now. If you can't love a Megan Thee Stallion, if you can't love some thought shit, then I don't even know what is life. Because sex is one of the joys of life. And so this was this one. Never had a chance to miss what I never had. I've spent my time lounging in unmade beds, wrecked by meaningless sex, men I just met. Good girls don't get good head. Choir, for every uttered that hoe over there, I've consoled myself with no regrets for the never done or never said. Exhausted myself in tantric positions, been held wide open, split, molten, and volcanic. Spent myself between him, her, and them. Felt alive and divine. Yes, I did that. Church, for the one who dipped clever fingers into my crevices, hunting for a bit of honey, suckled at my clitoris and said I tasted a wild honeysuckle ripe for plucking. Yes, I've been fucking. Tongue twisters twisted between the bodies of men and women, drunk and eager, phone calls and frenzy. I've spilt plenty of liquor in North Halsted bars, littered Lincoln Park with a body count that didn't heed the warning of my red pumps and skin-tight shirts advertising Catholic girls do it better. And so that's just one of those things I wanted to unapologetically own. Like, you can be spiritual. You can believe in God. You can show up to mass on Sunday. But the fullness of this experience means you kind of have to do some reckless things. You got to have some sex. You got to have, that is one of our joys. And so I think Megan Thee Stallion in specific, I think her unapologetic embrace of her feminine power is something that, especially in a time in this country in which women are being continually asked to reduce and shrink themselves, is as fierce a prayer as any. And I think it's absolutely worthy and divine. And so it just needed to be said. I wanted to ensure that it was a full spectrum represented here.
I agree. And I love thinking about Megan Thee Stallion's music as prayer. I love thinking about that. And I think that's a sort of perfect place for us to pause and maybe open up for some questions. And then if we have time, me and Angelique can close with a poem. And I also have like a final question that will suggest a poem for you, Angelique. So yeah.
Great. I love it.
Hey y'all, this has been so amazing thus far. I've cackled, I've clutched my pearls, I've put tea emojis in the chat. I'm really living, I'm loving the conversation that's happening. While people in the chat are thinking of their questions, I wanted to throw a question at the two of you, and this is a selfish one that I always think of as the marketing and communications director here, and as a writer. So usually during these conversations, and this is Dimitri, by the way, marketing and communications person, we talk about craft and behind the scenes of what's happening in the pages. But you know, I know, and a lot of these people that are writers here know that a whole book could be written about the journey to get the book published, right? So can both of you talk about just how long you were writing these collections, or talk about the journey to finding a publisher?
I think I'll let Taylor start first because hers came out last year and I want her to talk about this journey.
Yeah. Part of my journey was like, not knowing that I was writing a book while I was writing most of the poems. Which I think is kind of how it often happens. You're writing and then you find out that like suddenly there are these sort of threads between everything that you've been thinking about. That's kind of what happened for me. I was sort of in the beginning of my PhD program. And at the beginning of that, I did have a manuscript workshop. So I was kind of forced to think about if I had a book and sort of what that looked like for that class. And so that in that class, the earliest version of I Didn't Click My Heels 3 times sort of came to be. And it was not the version of it that is out today in people's hands. I, workshopped it in that class, and then I got an agent, which I got, mind you, because I posted a poem on Twitter and it found my agent, and that's how my agent found me. So for all of those who don't think social media is valuable, I just want to say that. Um, and so when I got an agent and we started talking about selling the collection, then me and my agent sort of went through this editing process where she's thinking about, okay, what's the best version of this book that's going to sell, that's going to like market. And so then we reorganized it. It was in like 3 big sections. There were some poems in there that are like not in this version of the book. And then when we did sell it to Soft Skull, which feels like forever ago now, I was then assigned an editor at Soft Skull, and then we went through the sort of final editing process together, in which this organization that you see, the 7 sections, we decided to break up the Sonic Crown. We decided to, name the sections after, song titles of the movie. Like everything sort of really came together, especially how the Wiz kind of more fully settled into the book came together in that last editorial process. So ultimately, I was just writing poems for maybe, 3 years. And then I had to think about like how these poems were speaking to one another. And then I just had to be told no a whole bunch of different times to kind of get this version of it that exists. But I think also that experience has really solidified the value of killing your ego and being told no and being open to being told no. And how that can sometimes lead you to the best version of a thing for sure. And so that's how I Don't Click My Heels has come to be for me.
Now, oh my God, I can't even imagine any other version of I Done Click My Heels, because I remember the first time I read it, I was like, oh my God, revelation. So I obviously all of the work that you did in support of it was just incredible. My process was a little bit different because I'm not within the academic environment right now. I had I have like a whole ton of poems just kind of laying around. But these and Seraphim kind of represent the ones that had I didn't recognize as I was writing them had a specific point of view. I had kind of started again, I think it was back in like 2016. And I wrote my first chapbook. It got picked up and released in 2020, and it was called Love Letters to the Revolution, which was to my daughter. And it was again about how, again, centered in the idea that I am gifting this legacy to my daughter, this legacy of revolution that I also inherited from the women before me. And a good friend actually, her name is Annie, and she had read that and she said, there's so much more that you could do. This absolutely cannot just stay a chapbook. And I kind of put it aside because I was exhausted with after I had finished that. It was, all emotionally gut wrenching and emotional, but I had an opportunity and I got to step back. And after about a year or so, and I said, let me pop back into this. And she was right. There were things that had not been in Love Letters to the Revolution. Like the woman is sexual, which was weird because it had so much about parenting and birth, and I'm like, babies don't get here by virgins. So there you go. And so there were so many things about, who all should be included that I got to expand on. And so that's how Seraphim took shape. But even the sections, the journey that exists in there, I submitted this thing and there were no sections. I was like, a lot. I'm like just throwing 50 some odd poems at a person and telling them to read it straight through, because those aren't things that I had thought through, right? And so CavanKerry was gracious and free with their feedback and said, hey, you want to give some people some time to breathe. And it became a process of where are the natural cuts in this journey. And the titles all came from within the poems, within those sections. And so it was a great lead into that. But like Taylor said, it was about, killing the ego and being willing and able to accept the feedback of folks who, had seen, had the exposure and it seen so much from so many. So, which I've been eternally grateful for.
Yeah, yeah. You sort of already kind of touched on the Melissa's wonderful question in the comments about how did you decide when or where and what way to incorporate poems from previous chapbooks into this collection? Did you develop it around those poems? How did that work? So I can answer this question as well. So for I Didn't Click My Heels 3 Times, a chapbook, poems from a chapbook didn't really turn into that. But for my second book, affectionately titled Resting Bitch Face, so my chapbook Shudder is essentially the sort of like beating heart of Resting Bitch Face, and was kind of like an explosion. I like to just wake up some days and assign myself a very torturous poetic task. And so one day I was like, you know what would be great? You should just write an ekphrastic chapbook just for the hell of it. And I started to do that. And that's kind of where Shudder came from. That's kind of like the impetus for that. And then sort of similar to what you were talking about, Angelique, you realize that like there's just way too much there. There's so much more there than you ever originally imagined. And so I think for what it sounds like kind of both of us happened, there was like this epiphany that there was just so much more to be said. And then you just kind of like explode out from that original project, and you have all of these other threads that then have the space to kind of come in and connect to the original thing. And that's very much how it happened for me as well for Shudder and Resting Bitch Face. So I think it just kind of happens naturally, and then you find yourself kind of writing around or like sort of building the web out in those additional poems for sure. If we don't have any other questions in the chat, I can pose my closing question, and then we can each read a closing poem if that sounds good. Okay. The last poem in my book, Dear Moon, is also the very last poem that I wrote for the book. And one of the things that I really love about this poem is it felt like I came to an epiphany about what this book meant to me after having like written it and put it, kind of like putting it together. And so I want to read this poem, and I feel like there's a similar poem for you, Angelique, that feels like a kind of thesis. After going through your book, thinking about religion alongside the body, desire, joy, I feel like this sort of new religion emerges, a religion of sort of stillness, slowness, pleasure, devotion, devout attention. And I think your poem Confession for me really captures that. So I would love if you would close us out with Confession, and then I will go ahead and read Dear Moon for us. Dear Moon.
All right. So
oh, do you want to go for you want to close? You're the guest of honor.
No, okay, you go first. Also, I have to say before you jump in though, Dear Moon, like when I got to it, I was like, oh, seriously? So yes, please do. But now I have to follow that. So
you got it. You got to cover it. You got to cut it. Yeah, they say we have to like write a moon poem to like be poets officially. So I like had to do it also for that reason. So, dear Moon, when the dark curtains for the bedroom came, I blacked you out like the night you fight in. Forgive me, but I'm still working through it in therapy. Lately, I've been so sudden with my decisions. Cut my braids out of my head a month early, put a deadline on a man's love. I'm leaving space for nothing but blame in the new season, and this here is no different. I never told you about the great hurt between us. Me, 13, and thinking I needed you to speak back to me. Back then, I skipped my wishes to you like stones over water. I slept in the overhang of mornings that relieved your shift. I'm angry. I still don't know what to call the thing between us. Were you friend or sister? The first lover to leave when I became too much? I've surrendered to the half-truth. Men remind me of you. The mixed messages, you in my bed every night and nothing ever to say of it. My therapist says I'm projecting, but goes silent when I mention that you've been doing it to me my whole life. At night, I get moody and waiting, anxious for you to ask me how I've been, anxious enough to pay someone to ask me now instead. The harder and fuller truth, men have abandoned me and I never heard from you. I was a shadow of a wolf, whimpering into your blank light. I didn't know that love was an ancestor of quietude, that you were still there. Of all things love, I'm still learning.
All right, good God. So, oof, okay, that is fire. I love it so much. So, this one is confession. I want to be a poem and pride wide open, be held by a lover who wants to linger. No one's ever adored me just for existing, or run their fingers across my spine with reverence, spent themselves analyzing my edges. I long to be read at dusk, as soft and earnest as Vesper songs put to song. I want to be eased into, poured over, studied in rumpled bed sheets, touched by sleepy fingers on Sunday morning, handled as gently as artifact.
Absolutely.
Look, I'm like,
Absolutely.
don't we all want that?
Period.
Period.
And do. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Taylor, thank you so much. You know how much I adore you, so I appreciate you taking the time to launch this book with me. Everyone who is here, I see so many familiar faces, so many folks I love within the poetry community, within my mom communities, within my spiritual community, within my family. I saw my Aunt Pat here. And just so many folks that I admire and love. So thank you so much for spending time with me and Seraphim. It means a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to share this night with you and celebrate this book with you. I'm so excited for you and everything that this book is going to do. So thank you for letting me be a part of it. And to Dimitri, to CavanKerry Press, thank you all so much for making this happen, making this possible.
They are the MVPs. I love them. Thank you, CavanKerry Press.
Honestly, this was absolutely, I need this. This is the church fan that everyone needs. Seraphim and I done clicked my heels. A to Z, 20% off. We didn't market it that much, but yo, get this for a friend, get this for your aunties, get this for everyone, the neighbor down the road, the folks at the store, all of that. It's just an amazing collection. And thank you both so much for this evening. I just love this, and this is what it's about, finding work that are conversation starters, work that's going to connect with others, and then having other authors that are making dope work too. come through and then have these wonderful conversations. So at this point in time, Tamara, I'm going to ask you to unmute everyone. I'm taking everyone off spotlight so everyone could say their good nights. This was amazing, y'all. Again, thank you. Amazing, amazing, amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Woohoo! Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a treat to hear both of you read tonight. Thank you.
Thank
I'll
you.
meet you in person one day, Angelique.
All right.